that, we want to get into our week in perspective right here, and that is with Mentoria CEO and economist Ken Gishinga, as always. Ken, always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me, Malika.
Now, before, again, we went on break, one of the stories that was very pivotal that we talked about was President Uhuru Kenyatta on the rate cap. Now, he has in that memo told MPs to retain the interest, that he is not in support of them retaining the interest rate cap in the Finance Bill 2019, and they need to rework the repeal section 33B, and that is of the Banking Act. So there's a lot going on here, and a lot of people have been lobbying for the repealing of the rate cap for a long time, including IMF, Treasury, and many more, CBK as well. What do you think? Will we be able to repeal it at this point? Is it already time to say, yes, this is going to happen?
I think it's a positive development. Economists rarely agree on various topics, but this is one topic where almost every economist has said this thing is bad for the economy. Why? Because banks are unable to price risk. So they're unable to provide loans into the economy. And that's the reason we are seeing the economy in a very slumpish mood, because no banks are lending and government is not spending. So I think this is something we've talked about for very many times. And I'm happy that the message has gotten to the highest office in the land. I know Parliament will put up a fight, but I think this is something that any economist will tell you, this is what the economy needs. We need to get back to the free market in terms of opening up the credit markets. And that's the best way. Interest rate might be high, but we have to ask ourselves, how do banks naturally, organically bring the interest rates down? And it's definitely not legislate. You cannot legislate on prices in a free market economy.
Of course, like you say, the cash crunch in the private sector has been something that has reached maybe detrimental levels at this point. So we need to have this repeal. And like you said, a lot of economists have echoed this. But when it comes to that double-edged sword, that yes, banks will have their free rein, and perhaps they will be charging too much interest. However, there will be access to capital for people, and that's the main point. How do you think they should play it out? Yes, you said organically, but what are some of the strategies that could be still put in place to maintain some sort of, I would say, control still?
Well, they have to look at how competitive is the banking sector. And if you have 42 players, it's very difficult to say that 42 players are colluding to make interest rates high. So we have to understand there's a structural problem that we have to understand. And let's fix the structural problem, and interest rates will naturally come down. And what are those structural problems? It's the cost of doing business in Kenya. A bank will lend to you as an SME, but because there's a high probability you might default, they have to price it accordingly. So I think that move towards risk-based pricing, I think that is what we have to bring to the table.
Okay, so positive development there, and we'll see how it plays out. But of course, ease of doing business is something that we've talked about fairly often as well. And as Kenya placed 61 out of 100 on that list globally, we keep hoping that it keeps going even higher.
No, absolutely. I think it's a good thing for Kenya. But what I found it contradicting, it contradicted another report by the World Economic Forum.
Okay.
We talked about the competitiveness of Kenya. So Kenya went down from position 93 to position 95. So the question is, how are we becoming easier in terms of doing business, but you're becoming less competitive? So I think at some point we have to, yes, these are good reports to have, but we have to talk to the people on the ground, ordinary businessmen, and ask them, is it true that it's easy to do business in Kenya? And people in the manufacturing sector, you just saw the interview with the BATMD.
Yes.
They'll say it's very difficult. There are so many licenses you have to pay. There are so many taxes. So yes, it could be a pat on the back in terms of a number in a report, but still the feeling among most ordinary people in commerce that we have a long way to go before we get to the place where in Rwanda, for example, you can register a business in a 24 hours. Those are the places we need to get to become as competitive as we need to have.
As they say, things on the ground are different.
That's a popular hashtag there.
Very. But let's move forward now to the monthly fuel prices, and we'll let you take a look at this. Now, the petrol prices recorded a 4 shilling drop, signaling better times ahead for consumers. And that was, of course, we saw that super petrol and diesel prices dropped by 4 shillings 76 cents and 1 shilling 8 cents respectively. That's according to the latest review by Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority that was released this week. Now, the reduction did kick off as the long rains began in most parts of the country, marking relief for farmers as well. So from midnight on Monday, the maximum price of super petrol in Nairobi has been 108 shillings and 5 cents, while that of diesel is 101 shillings 96 cents. Now, families that use kerosene, whose prices have risen by 44 cents, it's retailing at 101 shillings 8 cents. So the pump prices, of course, include the 8% VAT tax in line with the provisions of the Finance Act 2018 and revised rates for excise duty adjusted for inflation. Right. What are your thoughts on the sorts of prices that we're seeing coming out now for the fuel?
I think it's another great move by the government. I think sometimes we often complain that government doesn't get it, but I think this week
they've got it.
They've really got it, because I've always argued that the economy needs a stimulus, and a stimulus can come in various ways. And one of them is price cuts on fuel, because fuel affects everything. It affects transport, it affects food, it affects everything in the economy. So as long as people can have more money in their pockets, then you're likely to see a resurgence of the economy. So I think this week we can give government a 10 out of 10 on economic policy.
Okay, so that's straight from the economist himself. But now on to our third story, and that is all about the SGR. Well, President Uhuru Kenyatta, of course, launched the standard gauge railway phase 2A, and it'll run from Nairobi to Suswa. So the railway that has been touted as the Nairobi to Naivasha line, it does not terminate in Naivasha town. KTN's Noah Kipkemboi was on that maiden journey. Let's take a look at what he had to say about that.
After 2 years of prolonged construction, finally, the SGR Phase 2A is open for business.
Makadara Express from Nairobi to Suswa will address the congestion of roads in the Embakasi and the ICD area, which has led to severe traffic congestion, increased vehicle operating costs, and increased accident rates.
Covering a distance of 120 kilometers, the project was to be a preliminary phase of a direct line to Malaba via Kisumu, though the government failed to secure funding for the Naivasha-Malaba Road.
The government has allocated land to our neighboring partner states for the development of logistic facilities within this area. It is expected that these facilities will boost businesses with those of our great partner states.
The standard gauge railway has long been a subject of scrutiny, especially on its viability, of which the president dismissed.
Nasoma gazeti huko ho leo rais anaenda kufungua reli ambayo inaenda nowhere. Mimi nimesema sawa tu, kwa sababu huna vision. Unaona, unakaa Nairobi, unatembea kwa baa yako jioni, unaamuka, unatafuta matatu yako kwa sababu unaenda pahali unajua. Lakini fikira yako haiwezi ikuambie Kenya ya kesho, Kenya ya watoto wetu itakuwa gani.
Important to note, though, is that even the Nairobi to Naivasha line terminates in Suswa, far away from Naivasha town. The multi-billion shillings project will not in any way ease traffic on the two busy highways between Nairobi and Naivasha. The empty cargo and passenger trains are to be filled. Will the SGR Phase 2A defy all odds and be profitable? Well, time will tell. Noah Kipkemboi, KTN News, Suswa.
Well, we have the man himself, Noah Kipkemboi, joining us in studio to give us more details on that particular story. Noah, how was the maiden journey?
It is quite interesting. No network, of course. So your WhatsApp, forget about that. You focus on the journey. It's quite interesting because earlier on, a lot of international and also local media were speaking about the train to nowhere.
Yeah.
And on all those stops, the president was very particular on that point. Yeah, and he brought up a story about, the old rail that we had. And it was being discussed in Parliament back then in 1894. And he said that the argument was the same. They were saying this train is going to nowhere, and somehow it impacted business, you know? So it was quite funny seeing the president react in that manner. But logically speaking, where the train terminates, the SGR to Suswa, actually it's 4 kilometers from the point of Suswa, the station, to the Suswa town is 4 kilometers. Yeah, so that is quite a concern. But looking at it, it's a discussion I think Ken will handle the economic viability of it all. From the government side, they're pretty positive we're going to make money from it. We haven't had a very nice experience with the SGR, you know, phase 1 from Mombasa to Nairobi. First year, 10 billion shillings loss. And we are asking ourselves, okay, this one actually there are quite a number of supporting factors. For example, the you know, the economic zone in Naivasha. We have the ICT being built there, and they are hoping that this will spur business. But from the outlook of things right now, it seems like, you know, as the president puts it, nowhere as we stand, but he's hoping that the place will develop. That's where we are right now.
All right, thank you so much, Noah. All right, with those details now, we're going to move forward with our conversation with you, Ken. It's 150 billion shillings that they've invested into this. I mean, yes, as Noah explained to us the factors surrounding it. What are your thoughts?
You know, anytime you put an infrastructure project, it has economic spillovers. The real estate around it gains value. It can help you transport goods and people. The point of departure with this project has been the financing, as you said.
Yeah.
It's just been 3 times the cost of the international standards and 4 times the original estimate. So from a project management perspective, I think it's not something we've done very well. And really, if you really think about it, it almost seems as if you think we are moving in a backwards direction. So for me, when it comes to the Ministry of Infrastructure, I think even when you talk about the JKI to Westlands Expressway, there'll be a cost to it. There'll be 455 shillings. So for me, the financing of these projects do not make sense. Yes, there'll be value in terms of movement, but if you really think of what the cost-benefit analysis from a shilling-to-shilling perspective, it doesn't seem very clear to me.
Okay, so the numbers are perhaps just not adding up very clearly.
Yes, first of all, if a project is 3 times the original estimate, it tells you something is fundamentally wrong.
Clearly.
If you talk about the JKI to Westlands Expressway, it's going to cost 155 shillings every day. You multiply that by 30 days a week, that's north of 4,500 shillings. How many people can afford to pay 4,500 to use an expressway? You know, so it creates some sense of inequalities. So for me, it's, yes, these infrastructure projects have value in terms of that they can make movement of goods easier, but it's placing a heavy financial load on Kenyans. And it's up to Parliament to be able to bring out these things, because Parliament is a custodian of the public interest.
Okay. Well, Ken, thank you so much for joining us, and your insights, as always, are very much appreciated.
Thanks for having me.
And that brings